And welcome, everyone. It is Angelo Robles, and welcome to Family Office TV. So glad that you're all here across my social media platforms as we're doing an other live. Really exciting as we're heading to the home stretch of the summer. And among the most common questions I get is like, Angelo, what is it like to work in a family office? What is it like from the family's perspective? What challenges do they have? And mainly from those outside the community, it seems like it's such a Shangri La to want to work in a family office. But in reality, is that the truth? Well, I'm going to try to shed some light on that today. And we're going to do things a little differently. I have a relationship of mine that I've known for many years in the community. And some of you know from his wonderful writing, his many, many books. I've been fortunate to be a tiny part of one of them. We're going to reverse roles where my friend, Russ Allen Prince, is actually going to interview me. And who knows, given his questions and a little bit of my feedback, we may even get a little bit of insight from Russ. So I'm going to welcome Russ to the show. And Russ, I'm going to turn over the reins as if this is your show. Here you go.
Thanks, Angelo, and it's a pleasure to be here. So, Angelo, as you pointed out, there's an awful lot of interest in what it's like to be part of a single family office. So, why don't we start with you helping us understand why there is so much interest among so many professionals in working for single family offices?
I'm still trying to figure that out, Russ, because if they knew the truth, they may not necessarily feel that way. So I promise with the audience today, to be honest, there are some tremendous advantages to working in the right family office. And there absolutely are also drawbacks to working in the family office. And so we're very clear with my audience. I'm really focused on the single family office. So that's going to be a bit of my emphasis. A lot of this is going to come down to like many things in life. It's supply and demand. Really specifically, supply and demand within a given market infrastructure. There are more people that want to work in a single family office than there are enough single family office positions for them to work in. Henceforth, that puts the power to some degree. We're going to dive into some nuances where that's not necessarily the case, but it puts the power for the most part in the hands of the family, not necessarily the SFO executive. To give some context to the audience, and there is no, I wouldn't use the word guesstimate, but of reliable sources that are out there, including me, having been in this industry for 20 years. But the AUM, if we could go with that word, of single family offices is about 10 to 12 trillion, which to give some context, I believe hedge funds, and I'm, well, at least partial on my business interests are still in Greenwich, Connecticut. The hedge fund capital of the world are maybe 4 trillion. So the single family office community is very large. It is growing. It is growing in influence. And it almost has a little bit of a mystique, I guess you could say, because it is private. It is opaque. There's not a lot of really good research and information out there. And for those that are under the corporate umbrella, it potentially looks like an attractive option from the outside looking in.
So, as you just mentioned, there's good and there's bad. But before we get into the nuts and bolts of that, when we say professionals are interested, when you're saying professionals, what kind of professionals are we actually talking about here?
Well, you have to look at it from, I guess you could say, two perspectives. Again, the supply and the demand. So traditionally, positions in the single family office would include what often is the head of the family office from a CEO perspective. Sometimes that is called a president, and sometimes that is called an executive director. But ignoring that, it basically means, for our purposes today, I would say a non family member who is in charge, just like in a corporation, not the chairperson, but the CEO. So let's call it that. That's an obvious position that involves a level of leadership and strength in communication. We'll circle back to all of that shortly. Obviously, a CIO, meaning a chief investment officer, a chief operations officer, a chief financial officer. I'm going to throw something a little new into the mix that we may dive into more a little bit later, and that would be a chief learning officer. While we're on the concept of C-level, I suppose in today's world, since the importance of technology and the rise of AI, and maybe a little more so for larger scale family offices, you'll also have the chief technology officer. You'll also have people that work to augment those teams, especially more on the investing end. And I'm assuming you're going to ask, or I'll get into, the chief investment officer probably is the most glitzy from the outside looking in. There are some families that are more allocators of capital, meaning they'll make some decisions on cash, on treasuries, but they'll usually be more LP investors. And there are others that will be more active direct investors. The challenge, and I'm jumping the gun a little bit, the challenge to both those people, and probably more importantly, the family, is if they're good, they're likely very well paid in private equity positions or a investment banker, and to attract them and then to retain them in a family office and to incentivize them, then you're going to kind of start to look like what Michael Dell did at MSD, which was an enterprise that made, and this is the holy grail for high-level CIOs that look at the single-family office community, thinking of, I think it was Glenn and John back 17, 18 years ago that headed up Michael Dell's SFO, and over time, building it as a true investment company actually became worth hundreds of millions of dollars themselves. And that really harkens back, a little bit, I would even say, way back in the late 60s or 70s with Richard Rainwater, who was a hotshot Goldman Sachs person doing deals around the country, but still young, I think 26 or 27, when Sid Bass and the Bass family plucked him from Goldman Sachs. And they really formed probably what would not traditionally be a single family office in the diverse sense of the word, but really more of an investment office. And the opportunity to attract someone like that is going to take more than just a decent salary and bonus and some ancillary benefits and compensation. It is going to take an opportunity to have a stake in the deal. Now, at that time, Rainwater was young. So likely, and I wrote about this probably 10 years ago, it was one of the most popular articles I've ever written. It spoke about opportunities to bonus up, an opportunity to invest, and golden handcuffs and executive benefits, and kind of how all that ties in. So again, as usual, I tend to jump ahead a little bit. But when it comes to the CIO role, it is more complicated than just throwing out that title without giving some context and clarity to it.
Okay. So, but you were now talking about the C-suite, all these different professionals working together and how it's sort of coming together on behalf of the family. Are there any particular qualities about these people that seem to make them shine more than others?
Yes. And now you're getting into kind of one of the heart of what makes me tick when it comes to my love of the family office community. There is no question, and we actually discussed this in the book that, again, you were the lead author, and me and a couple of other good folks, John and Peter, were junior to it. And that really, there's primarily three things that are a driver to the success in the family office. It is easily people, AKA talent, number one. And we could debate two and three a little bit, and I go a little back and forth on what's two and what's three. I'm actually going to move technology up to number two and systems at number three, but it could be debatable. Some people say ideas. I agree, but I'm lumping ideas with people, since for now, until AI gets even better, it really is people that are coming up with quote unquote creativity and ideas. So the right talent, let me adjust myself a little bit. It's not just talent. Most family offices are not that good. So if I just said people are the most important aspect in an SFO, well, you could look into that and say, then that means the leadership of the family and the people are not maximizing to their potential. And that's a nice way that I put it. I could be a little harsher. So, what internal traits does a talented person have, no matter what C-level that they are? First of all, how about this? What a surprise. Be competent. And that is a function to some degree of IQ, of course. It's the opportunity of their education, their learning, their adaptability. But that simply is putting in the time and effort and to some degree the experience. And you could argue sometimes learning a little bit on the job. Be competent. Identify your blind spots. We all have them. And this becomes harder as we get older and we have a level of success in a given field, our ego. So competency, identifying blind spots and moving ego aside. By the way, all things that someone in the audience will be very familiar with, Ray Dalio talks about. So that's a framework. Now, from there, we could do a deeper dive into the ability for critical thinking, creative thinking, AKA really when it comes down to solving problems. Problems don't go away in an SFO. You solve one problem now, there's going to be an other tomorrow and an other the next day. Actually, if anything, the problems sometimes get bigger and bigger. The capability of listening. One of the greatest fallacies is that communication ever took place. We think we're good communicators, but are we really? And now we get down to the challenge of an SFO. It is a single family, emphasis on family office. At the end of the day, I would like to see it be more measured on quantitative measures. My audience has heard me talk about that before. Or actually, I say 51% qualitative and 49% quantitative. The reality is most family offices heavily skew to being qualitative. Therefore, whoever hired you, whoever is your immediate contact or contacts in the family office, it really comes down to how they feel about you. That's a very, very important aspect. My audience knows that I've done a series of interviews with dozens of billionaires and literally hundreds of centimillionaires on the record and off the record. There are certain traits that I see in people who tend to be successful, including in the family office. One, they're conscientious. That's duty, precision, and they're very thorough. Diligence, discipline, ambition, stamina, extroversion, that one could be argued. There are some that are more introverted, but in general, maybe when it comes to being more of a leader of a family office, a little surprisingly, I found that to actually be something that I have noted. Agreeableness, actually, Dr. Jordan Peterson also talks about this. There are times when being agreeable is good, but I'm going to argue a challenge in a family office is sometimes you just have to tell the principal that idea that you had, I was going to say it's stupid, but we could soften it and say, maybe we need to clarify it and think it through a little bit more. So sometimes being not agreeable, and now this gets very difficult. If you're early on in your first day and you're probably not agreeable, you probably may not be around for day two. I get it. This is the nuances of knowing how to read a room and the situation, but don't always be so nice. Your job is to preserve the legacy of that family and family continuity. And to do that means there occasionally may be times where you have to raise your voice. There may be a back and forth with a principal or family member, and you may have to make very tough decisions inside the family office. Don't think for a second that just because it's a family office that you may be a lead of, that it's the most perfect single family office in the world. There are times, because people are the number one thing, where if they're not trained up, or maybe you're not a good enough leader, I'm not sure, a combination of both, then changes have to be made.
Right now, we've been talking about the people involved, and we said that people want to get into this, and that's pretty clear. There's a lot of people who want these positions. You touched on the idea of the CIO with all the potential revenue and monies that can be made in this. So what are the really good things that people are attracted to in the idea of working for a single family office? What really is bringing them to this place? What's motivating them?
Yeah, that relates a little bit back to your first question, but I thought it was good in your sequence that we had a chance to give some context to it. So there appears to be this perception, and maybe perception is reality. I'm really, really good at my core competency. Let's assume that is in some sort of leadership position, maybe at a big consultancy, maybe in more in the investment arena, maybe more in operations, maybe more in technology, maybe more in what else am I leaving out? CFO duties, accounting, etc. But I don't know. It's a big company, it's a partnership format. Like, I would really like the opportunity. These family offices, they seem so cool and they have all this money with one principal, and I get to learn from them and I get to have decisions that are made like that and not go through a whole team and boards and committees. And I think I'm at the stage of my career where I deserve to work, quote unquote, in a single family office. Now, that all appears very lofty and Pollyanna, correct? The challenge with that is, does that necessarily meet the reality of how the situation is? So, part of the challenge within a family office, especially if I was younger, but let's look at it. Even a $1 billion family with $1 billion broadly liquid, there's only so many of those in the world. There's not a gazillion of them. But are you going to have the resources that you had when you were an investment banker, or even at a major consultancy or one of the largest legal or accounting firms in the world? Not necessarily. Actually, probably you won't. Also, what stage are you in your career? If you're younger, and even younger, I may mean even under 35, you're going to have the opportunity to rise in the ranks, to have a career track, to have people around you that have more experience and might be better than what you are at the moment. And you have an opportunity to learn and adapt from them. And again, as I said, you have resources. You may go even into a relatively large by AUM family office, but especially now post COVID, maybe they don't even get together all the time. But even if they do as a family office, there's a good chance it's 15 or under in terms of staffing. So what stage are you in your career where you're now likely not going to have as many resources? Two, you're probably not going to get hands-on training in what you're doing. We're assuming your competency is already there and you're upticking that to adapt to the times. By the way, you're probably not, but let's make that generous assumption that you probably are. So now you're under something that is intimate and small. It's more entrepreneurial. You may not necessarily be used to that kind of environment. You don't have all the resources. You don't even necessarily have a quote unquote a career track. And maybe others are not seeing how well you shine. You may be under the radar of others that may be recruiters or relationships around you. Now let's reverse those roles a little bit and look at it from the perspective of the family. Too many families, when they're first creating an SFO, make the hire of a lead person to make effectively all the decisions of someone that they probably knew very closely in legal, sometimes accounting, or in finance. In theory, there's nothing kind of wrong with that. You know someone, you trust them, they're not going to hopefully not steal from you. And all those things are very, very important. But are they the best person for this job? So the challenge with a lot of families is they might have had an exit. They may now have liquid, $500 million, $1 billion or more, but they don't treat their family office with the same rigor or institutional level structures and how it's run as they did their business that they sold. The irony is they're effectively sitting on a pre-made business with, in my example, $500 million to $1 billion. This is their legacy. This is their family continuity. This is something that could change the benefits of their community and society. They could have that big of an impact. Yet somehow it's not run to the same rigor and standards that what they might have been used to in business or what the private enterprise that they had a liquidity event from. They go with the tried and true. Let me hire someone who's safe. Let me hire someone who's good at a specific competency to lead the family office, not knowing if they know how to adapt to a different environment, if they know how to hire, and if they know how to train up and lead. And we're not even having the time today to get into succession. There is a reason why the vast majority of SFOs do not last past the wealth creators' interest, sometimes that's even before their death. They just lose a focus or a passion for it. They find it to be too laborious, arguably too expensive. But I think a real reason is, and my audience has heard me pound this over and over and over again, and I know it's not mathematically an accurate comment, but most family offices are average to below average. If I could compare them to an NBA team, they're a lot closer to being the 12th man on the bench than they are being LeBron James or a Michael Jordan. I agree it is harder to quantify in the family office a level of success comparative to statistics and in championships in sports, but it nonetheless is a decent enough correlation that we can make to understand that benchmarking and best practices and comparison and quantitative analytics have to get much, much better within the family office to quantify results and to make it a better experience for both the family and for the executives or those that want to be an executive and work in the family office.
In listening to you critically analyze the single family office world, there seems to be an awful lot of inefficiency and ineffectiveness. Having said that, and not disagreeing with you at any point on this, but having said that, there are still an awful lot of professionals, as you said, more professionals want to join single family offices than there are single family office positions for them. So somebody has to see something in this for them.
Well, Russ, that's complicated. First of all, don't we all think that the grass is greener on the other side? So there comes a point in our corporate career, historically, that's about 20 years in, and we might have changed organizations 2 or 3 times. Back in the day, maybe only once, but in today's world, people hop around more. So there is a natural human tendency to think that things are going to be better, quote unquote, on the other side. And you know what? Sometimes they are. But I would say, for the reasons that I gave, did you get comfortable in your current environment? Do you have resources? Do you have a level of anonymity? Do you have a level of job security? I could argue in the family office, even with contractual arrangements, sometimes the family just doesn't, well, I was going to use a harsher word. They just don't care. They may just let go of you because they deem, and maybe they're right, that you're actually not doing the job. Damn the contract, legal up, let's bring it to legal and let's do it. And by the way, they may lose and maybe they'll pay you, maybe they'll take 3 years, who knows? So it does get complicated. You're used to likely working in a more family environment, but in the family office, you're working at the whims of someone or an inheritor, which may be better or worse, but the whims of a creator that may have a big ego, have a lot of money, a lot of connections, and be very connected, and just not, again, qualitatively, does not feel comfortable with your communication or the job that you're doing. So that does beg the question again of supply and demand. So yes, probably among the most common questions I get is, how do I get on the awareness of a family office? How do I know who they are? And of course, I'm great. How could I work for one? And again, it's a supply and demand issue. There's just not enough positions, even with what I deem to be an increase in SFOs, not as much in the US, but broadly speaking, around the world. Now, again, a different subject, a different time. What amount of money do you need to create an SFO? Is a more tech savvy and virtual world mean you can have an SFO at, let's say, UM? The answer is yes, but it gets a little more complicated because now it's virtual and now systems and technology come into play. Now, we could also go into a whole bunch of other issues. If you're deep in your career and you're now in your 40s and 50s or maybe older, I'm telling you, this world is changing. Look at geopolitics around the world. Look at the challenges we have in this country. Look at some of the challenges we saw with banks happen just a couple of months ago. This is very, very stressful. Now, I know you're thinking this is whatever a billionaire and so their portfolio goes down 30 or 40%, they're still going to be fine. They're not fine. They're not psychologically fine. They may be mad if their portfolio goes down 1%. Now, I'm exaggerating things a little bit kind of to make a point. You probably didn't have a lot of these issues in other situations you were employed at. And now you may be underpaid. Now, I would argue, why did you take the position? You knew what you were going to be paid. And now you're complaining that there's job creep, that I was hired to do this. And now I'm finding a roofer for the house in Aspen that has a leak in it. And it's annoying the principal's daughter that is there this weekend. Welcome to the world of the single family office. It is the family and single family office. If you don't understand that, then this situation is not for you. You want that perfect situation, especially more as an investment person, a direct deal person, the Richard Rainwater example I gave with Sid Bass. I mean, maybe, and the ones I gave with Michael Dell and MSD, those are relatively rare. Are they a little bit more common in today's world? Yes. Is it possible? Yes. Could people like me and others kind of have a conversation and help understand where you are and maybe give a level of guidance both on the family and the SFO executive side? Sure. But this is complicated. Now, you may be getting to a little bit later, but I gave some reasons already as to potentially why not to work in an SFO. We didn't even hit upon a really, really big one. If the principal, well, it could happen at any age, right? But if the principal is a little bit older, I don't know, 60s, 70s, or 80s, are they going to live forever? I mean, in today's world, we really don't know. But realistically, we could just go by life expectancy. So what happens if you leave a good position, you work for a principal that then gets disabled or dies? What then happens with the SFO? That likely is going to be dependent upon a variety of factors, mainly the heirs, the inheritors, the rising generation. What is your relationship with them? Did you find them to be a pain in the neck? And you were, I don't know if I'd use the word snooty, because you're going to be careful with a relationship that's a blood relative of the principal, but you may not have been as empathetic or as warm or as active a listener as you could have been. And what do you think is going to happen to you now? They're probably going to remember that. But let's not get bickering, because in reality, they should put that aside and focus on your competency and your ability to communicate and deliver. But what is your tech savviness? You're a little older as an executive now. The world is changing. I mentioned geopolitical issues and so many different factors, and you're getting cyber attacked every day, and AI is advancing, and the world is becoming more, or not the world, but the talent in the family office is more dispersed. In theory, talent can work anywhere in the world and still be active through a set of systems, structures, and technologies coming together in a common harmony for that family. But what sort of comfort level do you have? And what happens if something goes wrong? So there's lots of challenges that often relate to a lot of the issues of we're not adaptable enough. Who was it, Darwin, that said, not necessarily the smartest or the strongest, but those that are most capable to adapt? I went on a little bit of a tangent there, Russ, but I would leave it on that note. Adapt.
Okay, so you're describing a lot of the concerns, the complications, the issues that a professional has to deal with, such as the next generation that might be taking over and how that will relate. You're laying all this out, and it sounds like there are a whole bunch of landmines here. All right, so I'm a professional. I see a lot of opportunity. I have certain skills. I can adapt. I can evolve if need be. Why don't you give me some insight into what I would need to do to not get to work for a single family office, but get to work for one where the opportunities are greater than many of the issues you brought up?
Well, again, supply and demand. Let's make the assumption that you're competent. Let's make the assumption you understand blind spots and ego, that you're a lifelong learner, that you actually even have leadership and team skills to work within a proper setting.
I understand in my case, that's a lot of assumptions.
Yeah.
Many of them inaccurate. But let's go with it let's pretend.
So then let's pretend and make that assumption then there is the issue of, yes, are most SFOs, and again, I know mathematically not accurate, kind of not that good. Uh, but most principals kind of don't know what they don't know. They're happy with mediocrity. They sweep things under the rug, and they're afraid of shaking things up because if nothing else, they may have trust with their current person or team. And you may be a more talented outsider, but like, how do they know? Are you being hired to be a part of a succession taking place over a 1, 2, or 3 year window? Are you hiring to replace someone who resigned or retired or passed away or got disabled? Are you additive to a team? Is the family generations and lineage expanding so much? Like some families I know, they need a second, a third, a fourth, a fifth family office. One I know even has, I think it's 13, but that's with thousands of family members over many, 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 many generations. So likely you're going to make noise with your investment acumen, your legal capability, your operational capability, your accounting capability, your technological capability, and you're going to be deemed to be it's hard to say top 1%, but let's say you're in the upper 20%. So generally people are going to be aware of this. There's certain legal firms and other firms that are top level firms. There's people that rise to a level of success in partnership. Now, they may rise to a level of success in partnership because they're good at bringing in business and good salespeople, but that may not necessarily correlate into a more specific role in an SFO, that unless they want to morph into an MFO, another great subject we could cover at a different time, that aspect of, well, you could argue emotional intelligence in sales can relate itself to being a good communicator, a good leader, and good communication with the family. But broadly, that in and of itself is not necessarily going to be a sole driver. So you have to have the level of competency. I would argue in most cases, you're probably already working with that family as one of the legal components or accounting or technological or investment, and you get on the radar of the creator, one of the rising generation, or even someone inside the family office, and you're brought to the attention of someone, hey, this person's good. They're not just competent. We think they would, quote unquote, work well in the team. Sidebar related for 30 seconds. As a family office, if you identify someone who's really, really, really good at something, but you don't do it that often in the family office, listen up. Why do you want to bring that person on board? One, you're probably going to bore them because you don't have enough of what they're used to that gets them excited. Two, if you're that person, you may get dry and stale working for the family office that doesn't live up to the number of deals or whatever legal or other issues they said they were going to do, and you don't have the resources and the horsepower of partners around you to keep abreast the way that you used to. Also, what happens, Russ, when someone is really, really, really good? Especially in the investment arena where Machiavellian and swashbuckling, are they going to make a good fit working inside a relatively small, harmonious office that is a single family office? Maybe, but I also think there's a good chance not. So, and they're probably going to make more than often the executive director, the CEO, or president, whatever you want to call it, does anyway. So in that case, you may be better off simply outsourcing it. Why bring it internal? You're also impacting them because they're not going to have the resources or the breadth of experiences they would have if they're working for you versus where they are now. So stop this thing with, I need to bring everything internal. Besides the fact that you probably can't afford it or can't manage it. And by the way, I know 3 families in the Forbes 20 with a family office, and they outsource a pretty lot, kind of for that reason that I just described. And it works pretty good managing that through a talented family office that knows how to work with other people in the industry. But back a little bit more to the focus of your question. If you're really, really good, you will get on the radar. You will get on the radar potentially of the family, and you'll get on the radar of recruiters. Not every recruiter is going to be looking to move you around to different legal, accounting, or investment firms. Some of them actually do know about family offices, have them in their mandate, and could bring you an opportunity that could work within the family office? Also, who do you know that is either on the board of the family office, that is a friend of a principal or rising family member, or kind of a connector like I am? And then again, who knows where things like that may lead? I mean, I've been in the industry for, let's broadly call it 20 years. Probably about 10 or 11 people have gotten direct positions from me dealing with the family. And by the way, I'm not a recruiter. I get no compensation. And probably about 40 people in my decades, I've made an intro to a recruiter and they were qualified. I don't want to bother a recruiter with someone who probably is not deemed to be qualified and they've gotten a position in an SFO. So am I a recruiter or a direct family member? No, but am I a conduit? And am I the only one? Of course not. And if you're good in your field or rising, because I could argue that Rainwater being 26, I mean, there were probably other people that were more credentialed, were making more money or more experienced than him at Goldman, even back in that time. So in today's world of more social media and being aware, why don't you write? Why don't, assuming you're allowed to, your social media profile, books, articles, white papers, maybe you're allowed to have a podcast or a voice, but you need to bring, I mean, in today's world, it's a lot of noise out there and your competition is global. So you may need to make awareness of yourself and be, geez, I hate to say a little self-promotional of your own brand, but otherwise, in a world with 9 billion and lots of talented people and lots of noise, how are you going to get awareness? Otherwise, it's the randomness of, oh, well, I went to college with that person. Now they're a billionaire. And yes, I've had that happen with a couple of relationships that I know in the family office world. But there's no easy track to saying, I want to work in the family office. I'm going to go and get a list of family offices. Ha, ha, ha. Good luck at that. There are some sources, but do you think they're really looking at every email? You don't think they change their emails, and you don't think they're getting bombarded by a lot of things that are distracting to their everyday that they're probably going to be considered that. So getting on the radar of a family is hard enough. So again, there's not an easy answer to your question. But in the relatively limited amount of time we have today, given we probably have a couple of more questions left, that's about as comprehensive of an answer, at least in public, that I want to give.
No, that gives us good perspective. Now, people are talking about single family offices becoming more professional, becoming more institutional, right? How is that impacting this conversation? How is that affecting the people who are being brought in, how they work? How does this sort of play out?
I mean, kind of good and bad. The reality is most family offices have grown broadly somewhat stale. And I think they're well-meaning. And at one time, they were even competent. And I think what happens again, blind spots and ego. Also, a little bit of suffering inside the family office. They're too siloed. We don't want you joining organizations. We don't want you going out there. It's going to take your nose off the grindstone. Oh, and by the way, like maybe other families will meet you and pluck you from me. I think as a family, you have to look at that a little bit like a sports team does. If I'm a fan of a great sports team and I have a great head coach, one, I have likely a very good general manager and head coach. It starts at the top. You got to pay them well, arguably, maybe pay them the best in the industry if they're delivering what they need to. However, if they're a really, really, really good head coach, Bill Belichick, et cetera, they're probably hiring really talented people around them. And those people are going to get awareness by being in the circle of winning. And you are going to lose people to that. And that's happened to Belichick and coaches in all sports. Don't look at that as being the negative. That means people actually want the people that you have. But that does mean you have to keep that bench and that awareness always full. So to me, that does relate a little bit to maybe more in larger family offices. We didn't even really talk about it, but that is effectively HR. Now, how I feel about HR in corporate America, that I've worked in multiple giant corporate companies going back my, 35, 40 years, I think it's a joke. I think it's It's a PC bunch of BS. I think the character Toby from the show The Office, Michael was 100% correct. It's a disaster. That being said, there are some good people. I'm going to call them, and I think it's Cody Sanchez, who I'm a big fan of on Twitter, and her stuff is great. She calls it a people officer. Now, is that semantics to HR? We could argue that. But if people are the most important resource in an SFO, and I think that's kind of incredibly undeniable, period, then the importance of hiring the right people, because here's the challenge with hiring the wrong person: you may not know it for a while. Now, sometimes you do. And I would argue it's your fault. The hell with the fact that you may owe them millions. If they're bad, just make a one-time settlement and get rid of them even 30 days later. That's what I would say. And fault on you for making the decision. As the family, the buck stops with you. But that's the importance of hiring right. And the people you hire right, certain decisions are not felt for weeks, months, or years, which is why you want to have a sense of structure, a sense of board, a sense of someone who could act as a mentor, a consigliere, or services to help the family office, quote unquote, make the right decisions. So part of making the right decisions is what I now call having the right people officer. Again, maybe a little more applicable in larger scale family offices, but having the right hire and then evaluating the quality of their decisions, that is really, really important. I know I, as usual, got a little off track relative to the core part of your question, but that's what popped in my heavily right brain, which tends to think a little out of the box and creative. You have to have the right people officer, in my opinion, even if it's outsourced. And I interviewed the person who did that for Ray Dalio. Damn it, I'm forgetting his name. Jeff is popping in my head. He was a big guy. I met him at the Sherwood Diner in Westport, Connecticut. He also appeared on the old platform that I used to use for a podcast, 2016, 17. And I didn't really know what I was doing then, although some will argue I don't really know what I'm doing now, but they're wrong. That was a great interview. Maybe his last name was Hunter. I'm trying to think of it. But that was wicked insights into someone like Ray Dalio, both especially within Bridgewater, but I guess arguably for some of his family structures, and the concept of culture, of leadership, of hiring, of sometimes, like I said, and he said this, they may be the most qualified person for the job, but they're not going to be a good fit for your family office. But damn it, know them and get the opportunity of maybe outsourcing or giving them something, but they may ruin what you deem to be the intimacy, the cultural fit, the communication, and how the family office currently, assuming it's even good, works and jives together.
Great. So, people officer, got it. Now, a lot of these single family offices, as they've been evolving, as they change generations, more family members want to have a say. More family members want to get involved in some of this. When they sell the company, for example, now they're thinking, okay, what am I going to do now? I'm not talking about the person who created the company, but the kids possibly. Okay? You're the professional inside the single family office. We have family members, right? Some of them might have official positions, and there's a few of them that might not have official positions. How does this all play out in your ability to do your job?
It could often make it way, way more difficult. Again, and I did touch upon some of these issues earlier, there is the word family and family office. So who is the person that hired you within the family? Was it a person? Was it a committee? Has that person moved on? Has a committee adapted? What happens in a football team when a new owner comes on board? It is almost inevitable that there's going to be a transition, if not immediately, within a year or two at the most, in the general manager and head coach. Even back in the mid-90s with the New England Patriots, the iconic Bill Parcells was the head coach. There was a transition there. Actually, I believe to Kraft, or I might have that a little off. But yeah, actually, I think it was Kraft who purchased it in 94 and 95. And it just wasn't going to be as good of a fit. Now, again, and I'm a big sports guy, we could argue that Parcells, I think, is like the greatest football coach ever, but I'm a Giants guy. But I admit he probably is a difficult personality for a coach to deal with, for an owner to deal with. So these are some of the nuances that I could argue also go on in the family office, which is why if you're leaving a comfy position in corporate with a principal that may be in a dynamic, fluid state within the family office, and now you're dealing with other family members and they're just not down with you. So how could you help hedge your risk? You could understand the principal and the team that is hiring you within the family. You should understand some of the branches or others within the family that are rising, specifically the children. You should probably ask to have some sort of an engagement, even if it's simple as aggregation reporting. This is another reason why the chief learning officer. So the number one threat to a family, which means indirectly a family office. So the number one threat to a family, is it investing? No. Is it bad estate planning? Well, actually, it could be sometimes, but generally, no. The threat to the family is audience, the family. That's the biggest threat. Whether it's intra-family issues, lack of communication, litigation, not rowing together. And one of the reasons why, as families grow, there becomes nuances where sometimes it is better to have them go their separate way and arguably multiple family offices. But if you're coming in from a comfortable position, and by the way, stop coming into the family office world thinking that you're older and this is the last step in your career. It's your graveyard that you go to retire off into the sunset. Shame on the family for hiring you if that's the perspective. Now we know why they're not held to a higher rigor and standard. That's unacceptable. That has nothing to do necessarily with someone's age. You could be 60, be sharp as a tack, have no interest in retiring anytime soon, and do an amazing job. And you could be 32 and be garbage, of course. But I would state, if you're hiring a little bit on the older side, understand that it may not last forever. What a surprise. And succession planning is a big, big problem in family offices. And that rests both on the family and it also rests on the executive to have the confidence to be able to bring in someone who could appear to have the potential to one day, especially if they know it may be 1, 2, or 3 years out for them before they move on. And that's fine. But have the opportunity of having the right succession plan. I've even looked into working with Lloyd's of London if an executive were to move on without such planning, and not just key man like passing away, but just move on. Is there a way to actually ensure that? But insurance really only covers the financial aspect, which again, for $1 billion family, sure, money's important, but don't let a couple of $100,000 of whatever recruiting or other fees get in the way of your iconic business, which is now your money, your legacy, your brand. But I go back to what I said before, family. The biggest threat to family is family. If you're an executive looking to work in the family office, you may be competent at what you do, but you don't understand the nuances of family and the intertwining of the family office and others within that community. Now, there are ways you could get more up to snuff. There are organizations out there, Family Office Exchange, very good organization, the godfather of membership organizations in the community. And there are ways to interact in training or hands-on resources with those that could take you from 0 to 100, or if you're already at 50, from 50 to a race car driver at 240 miles an hour, and sometimes do that pretty quick. Russ doesn't toot his own horn, everyone, but Russ would be the kind of person that would have the capability of helping someone like that. And of course, I'm ever so modest, so would I. But there's not a lot of people in the community, I don't know if you want to call it coaching or consulting, whatever, that could really help someone understand the nuances. I've thought about doing certificate programs and stuff like that, and who knows what the future may hold. But for now, that, or even recruiting, is just not something that floats my boat. I have done it indirectly, like I have mentioned earlier. But again, and Russ, if you hinted at, which you did earlier, that I did answer, but it's worth repeating, The younger generation, and I think I gave this quote in an upcoming article that you're quoting me on, uh, they're they're probably not going to retain you. Like, I'm trying to put this nicely. Now, it depends. If you kept in communication with them, if you've listened to them, if you were part of being a chief learning officer, if you worked with them, then you're much, much more likely to be in a favorable position. And now, again, I'm at a weird age. I'm more old than I am young. But what would happen if I was in that situation now that I'm so-called more older than younger? And suppose someone in their 30s was coming into a position to run the family office. What would they think about the decisions that I make, how I process information? What would they think about my critical and creative thinking and about my ability to deliver what they want? Because it's their family office. It is not mine. Maybe I'm making millions of dollars a year, but I'm still an employee. I am not a family member, and don't understand that. That's the reality of it, and that's okay. You're a well-paid hired gun, and damn it, hopefully you're doing a hell of a good job. But what's to make that person not have a little age bias, to not have a perception of maybe even outcome bias in the past, negative or positive, without understanding some of the metrics behind it in terms of what led to it? So the perception of your capability, your competence, to some degree how you look, to some degree your capability of the grind and hard work, and your ability to be tech proficient and adapt is very, very important. I've never really met, unless they're on their way out, an executive in a family office who didn't want to continue or have an opportunity to move up, arguably into another family. So they have to work on their competency, their leadership, their communication, and they have to work on their skill set to be more polymath and more diverse, commonly in what they're doing in the family office. Because as we learned during COVID, things change. It may be remote. We may have lost the capability of a connection. There's a variety of different factors that play in. This is not a position, although sometimes families treat it this way. It is not a position to rest on your laurels. Either be great as a family or an SFO executive, or don't. Go home. Go somewhere else. I am only into single family offices being incredible and being great, but the definition of that does vary. And at the end of the day, whether I like it or not, it's going to be how the family feels.
All right. You laid this out, and what was really great about it is that you made it transparent. You didn't sit there and say, this is the most wonderful thing and everybody should go do it. Obviously, we sort of went into a lot of detail. You really laid out the fact that there are a lot of issues if you want to do this and what it's going to take to do well. So in ending this, what final words of advice do you have someone who says, after listening to all this and recognizing that it isn't some, magic path, what would you tell them?
And in some ways, although the how you framed your question was more from the perspective of someone growing a career or looking to work in a family office, and I will answer it that way, I also want to answer it from usually 60%, so more than half of my relationships actually come directly with the family.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I even noted earlier about the problem with a lot of the super rich or even those that are rising in the family is we're just not honest with them. Sometimes, okay, now I will be a little bit more blunt. I started off a little nice. Sometimes you just have to say, from my perspective, you're more successful than me. But from my perspective, being quote unquote an expert in single family offices or this or that idea you had is really stupid. It's not good. Like, let's stop the whole thing about gatekeepers. They gatekeep the world from what? Like their master? Like the whole thing about being dependent on loyalty of compensation, something that kind of concerns me. And I've had these talks with principals before. I think the best ones and the ones that built the best companies, especially after they sold their core company and what they're doing in conjunction with their SFO, are people that have the right people, allow them the flexibility to do their thing, and allow them the freedom to be excellent. and are not looking for people just to kiss their butt. So I think that's really, really important. And by the way, Russ, we didn't even get into like all the reasons why not to work in a single family office. I think we gave more than I probably ever heard before, but one or two that we didn't even bring up, although we kind of indirectly did. Nepotism. Is it that uncommon for a principal to bring one of their children literally inside the family office? Now, sometimes, damn it, sometimes they're qualified, and that's fine. And having a family member be involved on the board or on a committee or being involved in oversight, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Again, the buck stops here. Truman was right. So families have to take responsibility. But if they're not qualified and they're in the family office, and that happens more than it should, then that does create a little bit of a burden. Again, maybe working more remote in today's world, not as bad. Although, again, a lot of families would like you to be more active in the family office in terms of traditional office. And if it's small, the way that many are, it may feel a little uncomfortable with a family member that you feel, even if they're not above you in terms of status per se, I don't know, like maybe they're spying on you or keeping an eye that everything's right in the family office. And that whole thing about intra-family dynamics and all that is where a lot of people who tend to be very left-brained and a little bit more analytical, and there absolutely is a role for people like that. I'm not saying there's not, but sometimes they just miss out on understanding some of the nuances and challenges that go to working in a family office and being a part of it. And there was a statement that I said earlier from George Bernard Shaw that I think is worth repeating. The single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place. You may think you're a good listener. You're probably not. You may think you're good at communicating the important points. You're probably not. But again, what did I say earlier about competency and other things? You can't just be yourself. And now I know I'm sounding like a motivational speaker, which I do enjoy at colleges. But you have to be the best version of yourself. And you start that today. Again, competency, blind spots, and ego, lifelong learning, become better at critical and creative thinking. And it is very, very competitive out there. What did I say about supply and demand within a given market infrastructure? And that applies to working in the family office as well. Now, there are some circumstances, pretty rare, where the supply and demand works to the benefit of the person who may want a specific position in the family office. They had better be really, really good, and it probably better be somewhat quantifiable. So maybe if I'm a master investor in this specific direct vertical, and I'm already getting paid millions of dollars in carry and this and that, how are you going to make it attractive for me to leave where I'm at now to work for you? But if you tell me, hey, I'm worth $2 billion, we're not going to worry about exits. I'm going to put $500 million to work. I'm going to create a separate investing company where the SFO will help on accounting and oversight, but not be a direct report to you. And we're going to have co-ownership. And you're going to have the opportunity of, in time, making the right decisions, of maybe walking away, kind of like Rainwater did, or John and the other gentleman, I think it was Peter over at MSD and others, and be worth a lot of money. I mean, Rainwater at the time made the Forbes 400. So it is possible in the right scenario, more so from deep, really talented direct investors, but potentially, I mean, I spoke about looking a little bit like an idiot now, but I think I will be proven right to some degree in the future. There will be a point when I think what we're seeing in Web3 and crypto will be worthy under the CIO to have someone dedicated just to that. And you don't think we're going to see that in things like AI? You don't think that even investing in public companies like NVIDIA and others, being a direct investor, knowing what LPs to be active in the world of deep tech and AI is not going to create a lot of money? You're foolish. It is going to create a lot of money. So family offices that are more cutting edge, that see these opportunities, that treat it more like a real kind of for-profit business and not some lazy structure that feels dusty and 20 years behind the times. Now, yes, I admit I'm a little over the top. I like to be a little colorful. This is a boring vanilla industry. Let me have at least a little bit of fun. So there's just so many nuances here. So on the family side, pay people properly, hire the right people. If they're not right, get rid of them quickly and make it attractive for them. And don't involve nepotism in the situation and make them uncomfortable. If you're the executive, be the best you could be. You're not perfect. You have blind spots. You have ego. Know how to put them aside, how to learn more. Always keep adapting on your skills. And don't worry about a successor. Do the right thing. Do you think that Bill Belichick, well, he's older now, he may be retiring in a year or two. Do you think he worries about that some coach who's talented and young is going to come up and take his job? Of course he doesn't feel that way. Do you think Parcells felt that way? Do you think Phil Jackson ever felt that way? They were confident to say, I don't know everything. I want to hire maybe younger, diverse, really talented people to complement and supplement. And yeah, they may be plucked from me here and there, but I'll just replace them with other quote unquote talented people. Build something great. Family offices could be amazing. What did I say about people? Don't be yourself, be the best version of yourself. I could argue the same thing for a single family office. And my purpose and my goal and my life's mission for so many years, and now reinvigorated more than ever 24/7, is greatness in the single family office. And Russ, that's why, other than my commitment to my family and hopefully God and society, that is why I'm here.
Sounds like a good reason to me. So, Angelo, this has been great. You've really laid out how this really works in the real world, not in some make-believe fantasy. I think we covered the topic pretty well.
Well, I'm kind of quiet and shy, Russ, so
I see that. That was obvious.
I'm shocked we got more than 10 minutes out of this. I usually give one-word answers. Russ, you've been great. Those were excellent questions. Russ is going to be very modest, so I'm going to say a couple of words on his behalf. I don't know if I'd quite say a mentor, although Russ is older than me, so that may subtly imply that, although we're relatively in the same bracket. But Russ has been always, I know he may come across to some of you being a little bit of a curmudgeon, although today he's actually being a gentleman. He's been nothing but overly kind and very helpful and very informative. Remember what I said about you got to tell that billionaire, hey, that's a stupid idea. Russ has told me that about 200 times. Maybe I've had a couple of people tell me that once or twice, and I don't know about every time, but usually I would say Russ has been correct. Russ, I know what this answer is going to be, but out of courtesy, I have to ask, would you like for people that want to find out and learn more about you, how could they do so?
You're right. You know the answer.
They can't.
That's pretty much it. I appreciate the interest, but it doesn't work for me.
However, Russ, I think what you'll agree we could do is you're a prolific author. I love your books. Pardon the tiny contributions I might have made to one or more. For those that would like to learn more about your latest book or what you have upcoming, how could they learn a little more about that?
Amazon.
Well, this is the legendary Russ Allen Prince himself, everyone. So that's great, Russ. I look forward. Who knows, depending on audience feedback and your interest, we could do other variations of this upcoming later this year into next. Again, Russ is a columnist. You'll you know what? Go and do a little bit of research and find the great work that he does. Shockingly, he's going to be quoting me in some things that he reached out to me a week or two ago with some upcoming articles. So I greatly always appreciate that and look forward to being a resource. And everyone, I know you all have noted, Angelo, you could be a little long-winded in your intros. My God, today my intro was like 30 seconds. So now I have to make up for it a little bit on the back end. So you all know I'm Angelo Robles. I have multiple companies, quote unquote, under my legendary Wyoming holding company. All I know and love is family offices. For the most part, you could find out about everything that I do. I'll keep it actually simple. I'm trying to be too funny. AngeloRobles.com. It is still being updated. There's little aspects that I'm changing all the time. but understanding what I do with SFO continuity, what I do with Family Office TV. And at minimum, could you go to YouTube to @Family Office and I guess @Family Office TV and subscribe? I do a lot of long form, very, very deep interviews. And I am doing more of these lives that you could listen back in the live section as a recording, view, or audio, whatever you want. And more to come, but you heard me announce it last week. My real love is education among an industry that is known for being a little dry, a little vanilla, a little opaque, and really not as intellectual and deep as it could be, the single family office world. And hopefully I bring a level of critical and creative thinking to that. My master classes are extremely comprehensive. If anything, probably too much so. But I keep it engaging. I have a great faculty. And even Russ has told me, Angelo, a little more group exercises and case studies will also make it more immersive and engaging. So there's a light announcements out there now on angelorobles.com. More to come in the coming weeks. And stay tuned, New York, Naples, Florida, Miami, and of course, my beloved Jackson Hole, and likely London. Those are kind of core hubs for me. And I would rather do them in person over multiple days. I think they're rather special, but eventually there'll be a digitalized version, and these will be multiple hours and very deep. So this kind of topic about the importance of people and talent and all the other things about how to structure an SFO, how to set up an investment team, geopolitical issues, technology in the family office, red cell, cyber, what could go wrong, which is a list that really goes on forever, and how to adapt. If you only look to plan for what has happened in the past, how are you going to learn and adapt to things that are moving forward in the future? And Taleb, although he could be also a bit of a curmudgeon, he does have some excellent points in his books, and some of it, although not easy, is transferable to the family office world. But you don't have to go it alone. There's people, and not just me, there's others, including Russ, that could certainly help. And I look forward to having more of them on. I respect some people in the community and the great work that they do, and Russ would be an example of one. So on that note, you all know where to find me. Thank you all. Look forward to the next time, which will probably be next week. I think enough of me for this week, and look forward to that. And Russ, again, thanks for being our special host today.
It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Bye-bye.